we're a little bit early, but we might as well get started. So, how are you feeling?
Feeling great.
Good.
I'm waiting for the full release of the Epstein files, which I've said before. As long as my name is not in it, it's not fully released.
Fair. Um, so you received like a Epstein grant? Like,
$25,000.
oh, it's far larger than I even
Uh-huh.
imagined.
Yeah.
Why don't you just tell that story? Because I have heard this tidbit. I remember someone was bashing you, using it, and then I looked into the details and I was not terribly impressed. But just why don't you tell that story, actually?
So, as a young scientist at Duke University, I'm working with monkeys, and we have a young female undergrad who shows up and who wants to learn monkey brain surgery with me. And so I take her under my wing, but she didn't have perfect grades. And so it was hard to get her to get awards so she could get paid for her time in the lab.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, I had this rising little YouTube show that was called Neuro TV, and I'm like, here's what we can do. If I make if I make it so that you become the host of Neuro TV and we make a whole Kickstarter campaign soliciting donations, and this is not the part I revealed to her, but I had it in my mind then. We're gonna trap Jeff Epstein into giving us money because he likes to fund
Wow.
science
The
stuff.
the
He
hunter would
likes to
become
fund
the hunted.
exactly. He likes to fund public intellectuals, and he must feel guilty about women somehow because back then he wasn't considered
So
yet
what
a
year was
pedo or
this?
a criminal. So that was 2013.
Okay.
So back then he wasn't a pedo, but it was known that he was maybe involved in some advances toward women or some massage business. It looked to me more like some Me Too falsehoods and prostitutions. But I was like, we're going to design something that Jeff Epstein cannot say no to. And I made it rise as a viral thing on Reddit. We became first page on Reddit. These guys need money for their show and for the research of this girl. This girl became my girlfriend during this time. And I get an email from Jeff Epstein from my solicitation email that says where to send money. That was all he said to me, where to send money. No capital letter, no period to his sentence. And I
Wow.
sent my address and he sent a check of 25K, which allowed me to support this girl internship in the lab on monkeys while she was also
But
becoming the host
it
of Neuro
sounds to
TV
me
for a
that you
season.
were grooming this girl, if you don't mind my pushback here. But I guess
What do you
everyone
mean?
has all sorts of motives. She became your girlfriend. That's quite a coincidence.
No, I mean, what do you mean grooming? Because she was my girlfriend. I
My
was
tongue was in my
invested.
cheek when I said grooming, but I'm just
Okay.
suggesting that you might have had ulterior motives.
Well, I had the ulterior motive of having my girlfriend have money, of course.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
I had not heard of Jeffrey Epstein before, I guess, really 2018, perhaps he was arrested.
The second series of prosecution, yeah, came 2015 to 2019.
I
The
had not
Duke
heard
came
of
in.
him until that period. And
Already?
so, how did you hear about him? Uh,
Well, because in my field, Jeff Epstein is this crazy. But I'll tell you how I knew of him, not as a pedo, not as someone who committed crimes or had a ring of blackmail, but to me, he was a crazy millionaire who was funding these parallel thinkers who were kind of outside the academia sometimes, or they were kind of in the academia, but also leading projects of thinking of their own, mostly around the themes of evolution, eugenics, and biology and mathematics. So to me, he has funded most of my heroes, people like Robert Trivers, people like Steven Pinker. You have pictures of these guys
oh
with
yeah.
Jeff Epstein. So to me, it was a path of private funding, knowing that I'm an original thinker. I like to think outside the box. My theory, the revolutionary phenotype, doesn't quite fit academia because it's a little too revolutionary for the regular academia. So I knew that there was this kind of anchor that I could grab out there that was Jeff Epstein. And I tried at it.
Was
and
it
I
Pinker, the
succeeded
main
first
person?
time.
He was the most famous person whom Epstein funded, but also
I guess you
or was
could
friends
say.
with, because Pinker was getting plenty of funding at that point. Pinker's been
Yeah.
famous for at least 20 years since the blank slate. And but so do you think that Epstein's interest in evolutionary psychology was genuine? That because
Um,
it's an interesting question, because when the more you learn about Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, the darker it gets. And actually, Ghislaine seemed to be essential to the project. In fact, in ways that I don't think have been fully appreciated. But Jeffrey Epstein is sort of a creepy, nerdy Jewish character, and I don't think he would have succeeded, in effect, cold calling or approaching young women. And it was actually Ghislaine who was saying, "Oh, listen to me, darling. Come here. You're going to be a Victoria's Secret model. Like, you need to come to this party." And she would do that. She was very successful at that. And also, what I was listening to, Tara Howell-Mary, she's a very mainstream journalist, but she's definitely taking the side of the victims. But Ghislaine was involved not only in recruiting, but also grooming, and also the abuse, the sexual
Absolutely.
abuse. So the whole thing, there are many layers to this. So that being said, I can't think of a reason for Epstein to be fascinated by evolutionary psychology in a non-genuine manner. How is this buttering his bread, or increasing his sex industry grift, or
No,
blackmail
yeah.
operation? It seems genuine. Is it because evolutionary psychology is fundamentally about sex? That's sort of what's so exciting about it.
Absolutely. I think that you're touching a lot of important points. Uh, Evolutionary psychology is a fundamentally macho science. It's about how a woman can and should be objectified by men, and vice versa. Of course, the vice versa is rarely highlighted by feminists, but it's fundamentally you are an object, and here's why: you'll always be an object of pleasantness for the other sex. So in a way, evolutionary psychology requires this kind of sexual psychopathy of a sort that really you reduce other people as objects, at least for the mechanistic analysis. And I do believe that, yes, he was a genuine just fan of this line of thinking. Of course, working in the sex industry and being so close to Victoria's Secret and all, of course, he was into understanding why are we attracted to models, and why do people buy more underwear from models, and why do they not buy it when the model is fat, as the wokes have imposed these days. But I don't think he was doing it from an interested perspective in that way. I think he was fundamentally thinking that he was a philanthropist, a real one, and you could see him fund some things in math that have nothing to do with evolutionary psychology. So he had other lines of interest. He was really seeing him as a man who could advance things going forward, but who may not have had the genius himself. He was also into a whole ranch project of literally hiring women as cows for him to inseminate and produce legions of babies, which he never put in place. He never made it happen.
Ghislaine and Jeffrey don't have children. Is that
I
that
don't
is
think
correct?
so.
I don't think
Not
so
that I
either. I mean,
know.
he
Yeah.
might very well have fathered a bastard here and there, but Yeah, do you think, and I guess I'm sort of intellectualizing all of this as I do, but do you think in some weird way he thought of what he was doing or justified it to himself as a eugenics project of some sort?
He
Because
had this in mind of conducing an eugenics projects, but I think ultimately he was not seeing what he was doing as evil,
that's
and he
interesting.
was. And I think we're kind of dropping him under the bus as a society now. You know, Jeff Epstein is the last person you would want to stand for. And maybe it's my edgy aspect of my personality here. I'm always going to stand for the last guy, the one everyone wants to drop under the bus. But
Mhm.
he was dropped under the bus in many ways by society. And ultimately, what he was pushing, if the pedo allegations are true, I'm totally against this. But the fact is, most of what he's been doing, in my view, was prostitution of young girls that were adult or that were quasi adult. And so to me, it was much less dirty than people imply generally. People imply a circle of pedos that controls the world, that uses blackmail. I think it was a little less dirty than this. And ultimately, I think what we have here is a man who was absolutely such a fan of women, and he saw women everywhere as potential CEOs of everything, that it was his Achilles heel. And it's precisely this Achilles heel that I've exploited to get 25K out of him, because I showed him a female host and I said, there's a rising female science star and you can
Uh-huh.
pay for it. And so that's kind of that's how you can exploit these weaknesses in the woke mind.
I made my living from old thinking, but the future is for the way women think.
The way women think.
That's correct.
Is that not a sop because of all the depravity you've done against young women? And your new sop is that their women's thinking is the future?
No, I've always believed that women would be, in fact, be able to take over. I'm a firm believer and supporter of Time's Up.
It's interesting because, yeah, I think that there are geopolitical implications to all this, and those are the things that I want to know about. But that being said, I think you can sort of overstate this case on multiple ways. Pam Bondi gave a press conference where she said that there's child porn of Jeffrey Epstein with kids.
Yeah, the FBI, they're reviewing, there are tens of thousands of videos of Epstein with children or child porn. And there are hundreds of victims. And no one victim will ever get released. It's just the volume, and that's what they're going through right now.
Now, again, I don't put that past Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't think that that's real. I think that's
It's very weird.
that's overstating the crime in a way that makes it compelling for a Fox News audience or maybe even a QAnon audience. And I think also maybe to think of it as just pure blackmail, like they find an unsuspecting talented scientist or the new prime minister of Finland or the new CEO of Microsoft, and they're like, oh, come join us at this luxury hotel. Next thing you know, he or she, I guess, meets someone at the bar, and then they get photos of them compromat, in effect. And then there's a vote on whether we should, fund Israel or not, and they send a little attachment in an email, and he's about to vote against it, and then he sees the email. He's like, oh.
Uh-huh.
I think that actually could be overstated as well. I think it's somewhere in between, and I guess perhaps I'm again over intellectualizing this or almost treating it with too much good faith. But if you think of the idea of an orgy, it is fertility in a very dysgenic way, because in the Dionysian revelry, you lose touch with yourself. You might you're just pure, I'm going all Nietzsche here. You're just sort of pure sexual energy, and it might be homosexual, it might be animalistic, it's purely recreational or experiential. And if there is any sort of breeding, it's actually probably dysgenic. The king would have sex with a slave, or certainly in the orgy, there is no race. That's colorblind. So I think that, and I think that was an element to it. But on the other hand, if you just look at what he's doing and ask questions about it, he's collecting these elite people from around the world. Now, there's Donald Trump, of course, who's a total clown, but you see my point. He's collecting scientists, he's collecting CEOs, and he's collecting aristocrats, and he has something that at least resembles a breeding program, almost like what was it called, Freiborn, Lebensborn, excuse me. Which is actually also a little bit misunderstood, because there was some selective breeding going on there, in the sense of highly talented SS officers being given women and so on. But to the degree that I understand it, the most of it was about offering single mothers a chance to not be ostracized from society and to give birth to their children. It was interestingly kind of quasi-progressive, or maybe Nazis were the first Democrats, or something like this. Planned Parenthood, everyone deserves care type thing. But anyway, there's this element to Epstein where he was almost collecting the cognitive elite of the world and putting them in something that at least resembles a breeding program, even if it was not. So I don't know. I'm curious to get into his head in a way. Like, what was he after? How did he conceive of it? Maybe what euphemism would he use, or how would he justify it as well? I think those are interesting thoughts. But the fact that he's fascinated with evolutionary psychology, and you get into evolutionary psychology, you become a eugenicist in about 4 to 5 minutes. I would say, even if you're not going to admit that publicly, you can't really go down those roads without thinking in a certain way. So I know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, inspired directly from the kind of science he would cite, he would fund evolutionary psychology. I would say first, when there is a signal of interest, there is an opportunity for exploitation. So the signal of interest is the female body. Of course, you see boobs, you see ass, your eyes turn. That's why it's all over the internet. That's why it's all over each ad. That's why the female YouTubers, they display their boobs as they speak, even of politics.
Yes.
So ultimately, you have a signal here that has high value. It's visually attractive, to the point where some people could spend their entire life just using porn, never having real sex. And some people will end up in cells like this. So it's a powerful signal. Now, where there is a powerful signal, there is an opportunity for grabbing a conditional and a deceptive signal, I could say. So what does Jeff Epstein know? He has this admiration of female and the female body, and he wants to feature them. And he learns this with his work with Lex Wessner, which is, hey, wow, we started this Victoria's Secret thing. You just showed these beautiful female bodies in a mall. All the girls flock there. The guys flock there to see the thing on the wall. The girls buy the underwear because they want to look like that girl. You have a Jeff Epstein that in his youth probably starts realizing the power of the sexual signal of female, the power, therefore, of females in society. And he wants to be the middleman because that's his reaction as a Jew. Oh, I have spices in India and I have people who need spices in Europe. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take one there and I'm going to give it there. And I'm going to make money on the margins. So Jeff Epstein probably develops his instinct both for commerce and for the use of deceptive female signaling. And he's like, there's my recipe. I have a margin on the youth female body. I have Jason Maxwell ready to do all this dirty, like old female work. Like you almost need an ex-prostitute to do that psychological work of coaching females into massage with extras. And therefore there it goes. And my other side of the margin, what I am using the sexual signal for, it will be to attract minds that have power, minds that have influence. And I don't think he was doing it explicitly, like I'm gonna control your votes. But I think he was seeing himself as collecting like Pokemons. You gotta catch them all. The most people he can have in his entourage, the more impact he can have, and the more parallel functioning he can have. Like, what, if you need this, here I have this guy who can provide that. I have this other guy who can provide this in this other field. So I think that's how he saw the world. We always forget to analyze the human perspective of Jeff Epstein, but to me, it's the most interesting thing.
Yes. But it was all deceptive signaling at the end of the day. You know, its
Yes.
biggest consequence might very well have involved Mossad. I mean, the apple does not fall far from the tree with Ghislaine and her father, who again I was listening to this very interesting interview. Tara Palmieri. She has a Substack actually. I'll check it out. But she does very good work on this subject. But Ghislaine was Robert Maxwell's favorite child, and he would say things like, "She's the only one who looks like me," almost indicating that she was his real child, his only true child.
Mm-hmm.
And he died on a vessel that was named after her. And again, he was a fascinating human being, raised in a ghetto in Czechoslovakia, and then escaped the Red Army and ended up in London running a media company, a truly rags to riches story. But then at the end was a fascinating businessman and media mogul, no doubt. But at the end of the day, was a common criminal who raided the pension funds of the Daily Mirror to the tune of $1 billion or some just insane sum at the end of the day, and was directly connected to the Mossad, and then died in very mysterious circumstances. Was it an accident? Was it a suicide? Was he murdered? And then Ghislaine just follows him all just so directly. It's remarkable. She almost finds a kind of Robert Maxwell Jr. and Jeffrey Epstein, someone who's not even as fascinating as Robert Maxwell, but in my mind at least. But she finds her father, and I don't know. There are some aspects to this that are breathtaking.
Absolutely.